Save the Manatee Club is a non-profit, membership-based organization established in 1981 by Jimmy Buffett and former U.S. Senator and Florida Governor Bob Graham. Our mission is to protect manatees and their aquatic habitat for future generations. Human activities are the largest threat to manatees, and only our compassion and action can protect them. With increased awareness, education, regulation, and enforcement, human-related manatee deaths can be substantially reduced or eliminated. We strive to protect habitat, reduce harassment, decrease injury and deaths that are caused by human activity, and ensure that there are sufficient regulations to sustain manatees long into the future. Save the Manatee Club concentrates efforts on increasing public awareness and education, sponsoring research, rescue, rehabilitation, and release efforts, advocating for strong protection measures such as speed zones and sanctuaries, and taking legal action to protect manatees when appropriate. While most of our efforts are focused on the United States, we also assist scientists and educators in the wider Caribbean, South America, and West Africa with their conservation efforts. To help support Save the Manatee Club, you can join our Adopt a Manatee program and become a member. These symbolic adoptions of real living manatees with known histories allow you to learn more about a manatee while helping to provide vital funding for the club's many conservation efforts. To learn more or adopt a real living manatee, you can visit www.savethemanatee.org or call 1-800-432-5646. You can also watch manatees in their natural habitat at Blue Spring on the club's webcams at manateetv.org.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for listening to the program. If you're listening to us on the radio, thanks so much. If you are listening to us on the podcast on YouTube, please click the subscribe button. Also, share this video and like this video so it goes out to more people. All of our podcasts, I should say, are to do with amazing people that do amazing things around this country and all over the world. So again, if you're listening to us on YouTube, thanks so much. And again, please subscribe and like and share this video. We have a special guest on today. This is Cora Berchem. She is with Save the Manatee Club, and she does a lot there, and I'm going to let her explain what she does there in just a moment. But Cora, thanks so much for coming on. This is an important topic, especially right now in the state of Florida, where we're seeing many manatees die, and also we're seeing the Piney crisis that just happened, which could contribute to more manatees dying. So again, Cora Berchem, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to be here and happy to talk about manatees.
All right, awesome. So firstly, before we even jump into manatees, can you tell the viewers a little bit about yourself and what you do at Save the Manatee Club?
Yes, absolutely. So my name is Cora, and I'm the Director of Multimedia and Manatee Research Associate for the Save the Manatee Club. And I've been with them for about 7 years now. I started volunteering and contracting back in 2014, and then joined the staff full-time in 2015. So most of the work I do is related to education, any sort of outreach in media, such as the social media, producing public service announcements, educational videos, all those kind of things. But then I'm also very actively involved in the manatee research at Blue Spring State Park here in Orange City, Florida, in the winter time, where we count and identify the individual manatees. So I'm studying along manatee specialist Wayne Hartley, and that's sort of what we do in the winter time. And then outside of that, I also actively help with manatee rescues and releases, as well as some post-release monitoring of those guys.
Well, thank you very much for talking about that. And I really appreciate what you guys do. We have a lot of people that are environmentalists that listen to this program, so I'm sure they want to learn more about manatees if they're from Florida. But we have a lot of people, Cora, that listen to this show that are from all around the country. So we appreciate you talking about that. Can you tell the viewers how you found your love for manatees?
Yes, it's actually kind of a unique story. So as you can probably tell from my accent, I'm not originally from Florida. I'm not from the United States. I actually grew up in Germany and lived in New York and New Jersey for quite a while. And I actually have a background in film and media production. So that's sort of where my academic background is. And I worked in film and television for quite a while before I ever heard about an animal called a manatee. It was actually a TV production that brought me down to Miami back in 2011. And I heard about a manatee. I actually saw a stuffed manatee, like a plushie, like toy animal. And I had no idea what it was. And I was told this is a Florida manatee. And I was like, what? Like a seal or walrus? No, it's a manatee. So I had never heard about that before. But I bought the plushie, and I did some research. I had a little tag attached to it that said, you know, they're endangered, and boat strikes are a really big issue for them. So fast forward, I joined Save the Manatee Club. I adopted a manatee from them and did some research, and I came up with my own feature-length documentary about manatees. So that's sort of how it started. And then I was asked by Save the Manatee Club about a year later to join them to work on their live webcams and some educational videos. So kind of like the video production communication side of things. And then it transitioned more into the research over time. So if you had asked me about 10 years ago if I could picture myself in Florida working with manatees, no way.
Well, it's funny you said about the plush. When I think about plush, I think about like something at SeaWorld and the manatees and the plush they have there for all the animals they have there. But, you know, I'm not from Florida originally either. I'm from Rhode Island, so not too far from New Jersey. So we didn't have any manatees up there. I only fell in love with manatees, you know, coming down to Florida many times when I was younger. But going back into the interview, I do want to talk a little bit about Save the Manatees Club before we jump into the real important issues that are killing manatees in general. Can you tell the viewers how Save the Manatee Club came about and how it, you know, what it does, I guess I should say?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are a nonprofit 501c3 organization, and we were founded back in 1981. So actually 40 years ago. We're just celebrating our 40th anniversary right now. And we were founded by Jimmy Buffett, the singer and songwriter, and former Florida and US Senator Bob Graham. So they founded us initially. And our main mission is to protect manatees and aquatic habitat for future generations. So we do a lot of outreach and public awareness, education, legal advocacy for manatees. So anytime there's sort of an issue on the table, such as speed zones, sanctuaries, new marinas, development, all those kind of things where the manatees need a voice, that's sort of where we come in. And then we're also a founding partner of the Manatee Rescue and Rehabilitation Partnership, in short MRP. So we do help with manatee rescues, rehabilitation, and release. So it's a big group of partners that work together, and we are one of those members as well.
Save the Manatee Club. This is Cora Berchem. And as we keep going into the interview, there's a lot of important questions and things that have been going on as far as manatees. And I definitely want to dive into that. Going back toward January, we have saw throughout the past that manatees there's been, I guess I should say, there's been a lot of animal cruelty as far as with manatees. We saw back in January that someone went and carved the former president's name on a manatee, which is really mentally sick in my mind. We saw that people have jumped on calves that are smaller manatees that are just growing, of course. So can you talk about that? Is that a big problem here in Florida, that there's a lot of these issues?
Yes, so manatees are facing, all kinds of issues. What's really interesting about them is that they have evolved without any natural predators. So they have no predators in the wild, but they are listed as a threatened species. So they do face a lot of issues, and unfortunately, a large majority of them are human related, whether that's from pollution, from boat strikes, entanglement in all kinds of things like monofilament fishing line, debris, ingestion of trash, all those kind of things. And then there's some natural issues too. And the things you just referred to, it's a really important thing. That's what we call manatee harassment. So harassment is basically anything that alters the manatee's behavior, whether that's physically, jumping on it, pursuing it, chasing it, separating a mother from her calf, which is a, baby manatee. That's what we call a calf. Or, obviously, if you want to go as far as, if you're engraving anything on the manatee, whether that's a political message or whether that's just, the words "I love manatees" or something, it's just definitely not okay to do so. And there are some pretty heavy fines associated with that if you're caught doing so. And then there's some more subtle ways that are considered harassment as well, such as if you're approaching a manatee, maybe just to, get a close-up photo of it, and the manatee is sort of fleeing a warm water site that it's really dependent on during the winter time, or it stops nursing its calf because you're getting too close. Those are harassment issues as well. And a lot of people, they don't mean anything bad, they're not even really aware of what they're doing, but those subtle things, if they accumulate over time, can really be an issue for manatees too. Another thing we are seeing quite a bit is people feeding or watering manatees, although they may not necessarily see anything wrong with that in the moment. It over time really habituates manatees and all wildlife to people, and you don't want wildlife to associate people with food. You don't want that for any animals, and you don't want manatees to approach boats or docks or marinas looking for handouts because they have learned, to seek out people for those handouts. They're very capable of finding food on their own, as well as fresh water. So there's no reason to hose them with your water hose or to give them heads of lettuce or something like that. It is actually against the law. So we encourage people to please not do that.
Right, I agree with you 100%, because then they depend on people for food. If the people are not around or not giving the manatee food, obviously that's going to cause starvation and death eventually. So yeah, people need to, think of these things and use your brain a little bit before you start doing silliness. I do want to talk about the most important issue going on right now. Throughout 2021, we saw approximately 680 manatees have died, and this, keeps going up. Why is this happening? Is it a mix of pollution and other things going on? What is this?
Yeah, so what we're seeing right now, it's really not a good thing. So if you're looking at the numbers, I actually just looked at them this morning. The updated numbers, we've lost 649 manatees so far in 2021, and it's only the middle of April. Overall, last year we lost 637 manatees in the entire year, which that was already a really high number. So looking at an even higher number, and it's only April, that's really a scary thing. So this has been declared an unusual mortality event by the federal government, which is what happens if there's a large number of animals dying in a certain space at a certain time. And we are, along with our partners, investigating why that's happening. And there's definitely a whole slew of issues. One of the main issues is that over time, a lot of pollutants have entered the waterways. In this specific case here right now, we're looking at Brevard County, which is on the east coast of Florida, more specifically the Indian River Lagoon, which is 156 miles of what used to be a really productive estuary, one of the most productive estuaries in North America, not just for manatees, really important for dolphins, sea turtles, fish, the economy as well. It's really not just manatees. And what we've really seen over the years is how this whole ecosystem is degrading. Due to pollutants entering the waterways, which have caused these massive algae blooms, which then cloud out the seagrasses, which is what the manatees are eating. So if you're putting two and two together, you're seeing there's a large number of manatees, especially during the winter months in that area, and they just don't have enough food. And in the wintertime, manatees depend on these warm water sources. So they have to migrate to some sort of warm water source, otherwise they'll die from the cold. In a normal winter, manatees would just be going out to feed for a couple of hours or maybe a day at a time and then come back. What happened this winter is that there are really no food sources for them close by. So either way, they have to migrate out further, exposing themselves to these cold water temperatures, or they're just foregoing feeding altogether in order to stay warm. So we've seen a lot of starving manatees or very emaciated manatees that have sort of just foregone feeding in order to stay warm, or have gone out and exhaust themselves by trying to find food where there was no food. So right now, since the temperatures are warming up, we are hoping to see manatees sort of leaving that area and being able to go out a bit further to forage. But it doesn't mean that it's fixing the situation, because next winter we may see the same issues again. So it's really a long-term process. and there's no easy way to sort of fix that. You know, it's not that we can just plant massive amounts of seagrasses and they grow within 6 months and then it's all going to be fixed. So there's some more long-term things that we need to address for that.
So, and I talked about this before on a different podcast. People are talking about climate change, global warming, whatever you'd like to call it, and say that, yes, it's bad, but it may be good for the manatees because the water will stay warmer for a longer time. But that is not true, because it's also going to create other damage. Can you talk about that and prove to people why that really is not correct?
Yes, absolutely. We do get a lot of questions about climate change and how global warming, you know, can be a good thing for manatees, which at first I agree, it totally looks like that, because like I just said, manatees need the warm water. So if the water stays warmer, you know, how can that be a bad thing for manatees? So warmer water in general can definitely be a good thing, but there's a lot of other issues we're seeing with climate change. So number one is we're seeing an increased amount of hurricanes, for example, very strong storms, or just like really erratic weather patterns. In years after bad hurricanes, we see a lot of turbidity in the water, which can, you know, lead to those algae blooms or to increased red tides, which are an issue for manatees as well. If we're seeing these really erratic weather patterns, we may have a winter where 1 week we were in the 80s or 90s, and then the next week it drops into the 30s. So for the manatees to deal with that, that's a big challenge for them. Then another issue that comes along with the climate change is saltwater intrusion and salinity levels that are changing. So if you're having an area that's depending on where seagrasses are growing or freshwater vegetation, a change in salinity can really affect the vegetation. So the vegetation may not be able to adapt to those changes. And if you're having a big loss of vegetation, that's an issue for manatees if they don't have that vegetation to feed on. And then last but not least, with rising sea levels, a lot of people live along the coast of Florida, of course. You know, everyone wants to live near the water. And in order to protect themselves, they're trying to build these seawalls, which is really encroaching on the manatees' natural habitat. So if you're having these artificial seawalls, that can be an issue for manatees as well, because it gets rid of their mangrove habitat, which is really important for them along the coast, which protects against storms. And it sort of like roots the sediment down. So it's easier for these seagrasses to grow around that. So if you're seeing a lot of seawall build up due to, you know, higher water levels and increased storms, that can negatively affect manatees as well. So while global warming and warmer waters may be a good thing for manatees, there's a lot of other things that we need to consider that come along with that as well.
We've heard about the Piney Point leak crisis. Now, what I'm worried about with all this toxic chemicals being leaked into the water system, it could hurt manatees, fish, dolphins, sharks in general. What is the word on the Piney Point leak crisis? Do you feel like they have it under control? And what could this do to manatees in general?
Yes, again, that's a really good question, because although the Piney Point leak seems to be under control for humans right now, they're not in immediate threat, you know, for the surrounding area to affect the human population, which was a really big deal just right before Easter. The fact that literally millions of gallons of water a day have been pumped into Tampa Bay and the surrounding waterways, that can create a huge issue. Water tests are being run right now, and we're already seeing increased levels of nitrogen and phosphorus, which are exactly those nutrients that can cause these algae blooms. And like I said earlier, those algae blooms can have devastating effects on habitats such as seagrasses, which is, you know, obviously affecting manatees, but a whole lot of other species as well. If you're looking at the fish that are using those seagrasses, that can affect the economy of Florida. We have a lot of fishing going on here, so it's not just environmentalists and trying to protect manatees, it's really a much bigger issue as well. And the thing with that is also that we may not immediately see those consequences. You know, sometimes people, they're a little short-minded. If they don't see something bad happening right away, they tend to forget about it. And then in a couple of years, we may be coming back and we're seeing all these seagrass die-offs, and then people are like, oh yeah, right, Piney Point, back in 2021. So it's really important to think a bit more long-term of, like, if you're releasing all these nutrients into the water, what effect can that have in 2, 3, 5, 10 years from now? So we are very worried about that. And again, it's something we are pressing the state and the federal government to look into and make sure something like this can just not happen again in the future. You know, we're already seeing such a massive die-off of manatees on the East Coast. Now we may be seeing something like that on the West Coast. And that's just, obviously, it's not a good thing.
Well, we talk about the West Coast, and not that long ago, in 2018, we saw red tide, algae blooms on the west coast of Florida, fish dying, all kinds of water animals dying at that time. Obviously, that created a lot of job loss because, as you said, Cora, people are fishing. That's how they make that money. Tourism loss. People are not going to go down to a beach when their eyes are burning. So can you talk about the significance of what happens when there is, and I know you kind of discussed a little bit with the algae blooms, but can we talk a little bit about red tide too? Because this was a big issue in the 2018 governor and senator's race here in the state of Florida, because that really crushed the west coast of Florida for quite a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. So both red tide as well as the blue-green algae blooms or the brown algae blooms, which I sort of addressed a little bit earlier, are really significant issues. So while, and it does affect not just animals, it affects the tourism and the environment too. I mean, in 2016, we had a case of really bad blue-green algae blooms on both coasts, actually over the July 4th weekend. So all the beaches were shut down. I mean, who wants to come to Florida to come to a beach when there's a toxic blue-green algae bloom going on and you have dead fish swimming around, like floating around? You know, you don't want that. Then in 2018, like you said, we had a very severe red tide, which is causing respiratory issues in people. And again, like restaurants shut down, hotels shut down. I mean, it really affected the economy. And a red tide, you know, although it is a natural phenomenon that does occur in Southwest Florida pretty much every year, we do see more severe red tides if we have a lot of nutrient pollution in the water, because it can almost create a super bloom if it's fueling the red tide once the red tide is moving inshore, and it will just stick around a lot longer than it would naturally. If we see a natural bloom offshore, that may not affect inshore habitat manatees, fish, and those kind of things as badly as if we're seeing it coming inshore, being fueled by these nutrients and then just sticking around. So obviously nobody wants to come to Florida to see any sort of deceased dolphins, fish, manatees, all those kind of things, or go to a beach where there's literally, you know, where you have respiratory issues if you're trying to recreate at the beach. So this is really affecting not just animals on an environmental level, but really affecting our economy as well, because Florida depends on tourism. That's our #1 thing here. And people love to come here to see manatees, to go to the beach, to go to the springs, and they certainly don't want to encounter any toxic algae blooms or red tides.
My thing is, and I talked about this with the director, Mr. Rose, the other day, is that we're seeing these bottled water companies such as Nestle, such as Poland Springs, pump out water and putting them in bottles, natural water. And this is hurting not only regular people, because they keep building these houses, and where are people going to get the water if they keep pumping it out and putting it in bottles? But it's also hurting manatees. It's hurting animals in general, because we're going to have a water crisis in this country, but especially in the state of Florida. So it affects the manatees because, we're pumping all this good fresh water into bottles. And then obviously we talk about the plastic problem and plastic in oceans. And fish eating plastic. That's another story for another day, but it's just a problem in this country and in Florida in general, that we're going to have a big water crisis in this country, and it's going to be a problem not only for people but for animals. And there's going to be a lot more people and animals dying due to this. Do you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think the statistics, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, are saying that about 1,000 people move to Florida every single day. That's a lot of people, and a lot of people like to live near the water. So overpumping of groundwater is one really big issue, such as you said, filling up plastic bottles in order to provide drinking water for people. Like I said, in the future, more manatees may be relying on these natural springs. And if we are overpumping these springs and they're not outputting enough warm water for those manatees, it can be a really big issue. I mean, some springs that used to flow very nicely in the past have already dried out. other springs are facing huge issues with pollution. If you're looking at springs, you see algae growth in almost all of the Florida springs. People who have not seen the springs back in the day may think this is beautiful right now, but if you're looking really closely, you see a lot of algae, and that's coming from that pollution as well. So overpumping of that groundwater, can really put manatees at risk if they don't have enough water outflow from these springs. And then also people, living in Florida, it's one of the issues. Everyone wants to have a nice green lawn. So people use fertilizers. People use a lot of water to keep those lawns green. One of the things you really need to look into is like, how do you fertilize your lawn? Please don't use slow release fertilizer. Don't fertilize in the summer right before we have a big rainstorm, because all these fertilizers and all this runoff ends up in the waterways. And that's one of the things that's causing these algae blooms and the pollution. Septic tanks is another issue. Leaking septic tanks causes pollution as well. So all those kind of things, if you live in Florida, think about having a Florida-friendly yard instead of having that nice green St. Augustine grass, which is non-native to Florida. You may want to think about planting Florida native plants, which don't need the amount of water or fertilizer that that nice green St. Augustine grass needs. So it's another thing you can do to protect manatees in their habitat, is to try to be a bit more eco-friendly with what you're planting or what you're putting onto your plants or your lawn, so it doesn't end up in our waterway and then pollute.
Right, no, I agree. Sorry to interrupt you, Cora. No, I was just saying, I agree. If you're going to put something on your lawn or in plants in general, make sure it's natural. Don't put all these chemicals, because again, it doesn't, obviously the runoff, but if you have a dog or a cat or just somewhere, obviously if you put all these chemicals on your lawn and they're sniffing it or licking it, it's going to hurt them too. So it's common sense. Even if you don't care about other animals, think about something like that. We'll take it. We'll take it. So, say again, sorry.
I said, think about your pets.
Agreed. So as we move on to the last two questions, we did talk a lot about how people can help as far as donating to Save the Manatee Club. We got the 4K. We do have the golf tournament coming up. Besides that, for people that do live in Florida, are there other ways for them to help?
Yes, absolutely. So like I just said, if they can sort of control what they put on their lawn, if they live, by the water, even if they don't live by the water, can end up in the waterway. That's one thing you can do. If you're out boating, for example, we definitely recommend to watch out for manatees. They're very slow moving. They only move about 3 to 5 miles an hour. So try to adhere to those slow speed zones. Wear polarized sunglasses to be able to actually see these guys in the water. If you do see a sick or injured manatee, there's a hotline you can call. It's the FWC hotline. It's 1-888-404-3922. So that's a number everyone should have programmed into their phone, or have like we provide little stickers, decals that you can get for free from us to have on your boat. So if you do see a sick or injured manatee, to report that. Obviously, if you're fishing or if you're out recreating, try to pick up your trash. Try to not have that end up in the waterway. We have manatees entangle their flippers in line. We have manatees getting stuck in discarded bicycle tires, all those kind of things. If you do see that, try to pick it up. And even if it's not your own trash, it can really make a difference to try to get rid of that. So those are definitely some things people can do. And you can sign up for our Action Alert Network as well on our website at savethemanatee.org/sign-up. So if you are interested in staying in the loop sort of about what we do, we oftentimes need the public's help for petitions or those kind of things when we work with the federal or state government. That's another thing you can do as well, no matter if you live in Florida or outside of Florida.
SaveTheManatee.org. Again, SaveTheManatee.org. Definitely check it out. Again, these animals are in a crisis right now. A lot of it is because of our own doing as people. So try to help them out. We need to get the numbers back up. This was Cora Berchem. And Cora, thanks so much for your time and really educating the people that are listening about manatees.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to do that.